This podcast is made possible through donations from listeners like you and our partners at Tallman Equipment, where they pride themselves on equipping their customers with the tools they need to get the job done right. They are dedicated to set the standard for quality, convenience, and reliability. At Tallman, your opinion is important to them. Rate and review any product or tool you've used on their new website at tallmanequipment.com. Line 11 Clothing Company, making apparel for our first responders with a positive message to patriots that you can be proud of. A proceed of the cost goes to helping our foundation ignite the fire for father engagement. Give them a follow at Line 11 Clothing on Instagram. And last but not least, Monzingo Knives. Each knife is created with craftsmanship that only a tradesman could provide. Find them on Instagram at Monzingo Knives and get your American-made Monzingo knife today. I also would like to thank Southeast Lineman Training Center. It is a premier school for line worker training. SLTC produces an elite group of highly trained and certified graduates equipped with the knowledge, discipline, and ability to have successful careers in the electrical utility and communications industries. Learn more at lineworker.com. What up, guys? This is David from the Show Up Dad, bringing you another episode to help us understand that we are more than just a paycheck for our families. At the Show Up Dad, we recognize that fathers providing for their children is certainly important. But when we as men truly understand our unique role and gain the knowledge and skills to be great fathers, we can transform and impact future generations. Today's guest is Lamar Hill. He is a clinical social worker, owner of 4 Elements Therapy, author of Are You My Daddy? Children's book. Now, this book is aimed at lifting up all fathers through diversity and grace. It's not necessarily the big moments in our children's lives that define us as fathers and make the greatest impact. Rather, all the small, unnoticed moments in between that build the strongest foundations with our kids. Welcome to the Show Up, my man.
Thank you. So glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, Lamar. Go ahead and tell us a little bit about your upbringing and how it was like, if you don't mind, Lamar.
My upbringing was pretty typical of trauma. My 2 parents, I never knew my birth dad growing up. I just know him from the name on my birth certificate. He was an Air Force guy. My mom is a Native American woman out of the Fort Berthold Reservation. And so my mom struggled with mental health, substance use, the co-occurring mental health stuff and chemical addictions. And at a young age, took her life, completed suicide. And that left my older brother, my older sister, and I in the foster care system, which then pretty quickly we were taken in by the Ness family out of Douglas, North Dakota. You're going to have to look that one up. But Douglas, North Dakota, where we spent basically our lives up until now. They're still our parents and it's still our home. Growing up in basically upper Midwest, white, agricultural, very, very rural area of the United States and the Dakotas. And so just kind of growing up in that aspect of kind of being misplaced, being in a foster care system, in an environment that there wasn't a lot of diversity in it. The diversity that was there, there's often just jokes and just stereotypes that would go along with it. And so having to kind of grow up with that. And my parents were very supportive. My siblings were very supportive. Both my biological siblings, but also, my parents' biological children too. We were a big family. I think we had 5, not at one time, but ultimately I have 5 brothers and 5 sisters. And so, just kind of growing up, we were a pretty big family, but that wasn't a big issue back then because big families and traditional families were kind of more the norm. And so that looks a little bit different now, especially when I talk to people about my family. They're like, holy smokes, you guys had 10 people? like, yeah, that was our family. And so, um, but just kind of growing up with a blended family. I was the youngest out of my biological siblings, so I often think about and I often say that I think my older siblings probably had it a lot worse than me growing up, because I think they were older than me, and I think they had to kind of set the tone um, as they kind of were integrated into in the communities and into the school systems. And so I think by the time I got into school, I think the community had adjusted pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
And my parents have always done a phenomenal job of advocating for and being a voice for and being a presence for us. And they still continue to do that. So I think my parents were just those folks that you just really want to mess with.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't people to get pushed around with, and they were going to stick up for and advocate for. And so I think by the time I got to that age where I was kind of more aware of these things, I would I feel comfortable saying that I think, we were just a part of the community, part of the fabric.
Mm-hmm.
And that changed a little bit, I think, as I became a little bit older and I graduated and I, moved on and out of the home and out of the community. I think it changed a little bit, but I think I was coming into my own identity kind of crisis, so to speak, where all of a sudden I didn't, um, in some circles I'm not black enough. In some circles I'm too black, and in some circles, holy smokes, and you're Native American, you know, and then and you grew up in a white home, and it's like, so I went through a period of time in my late teens, and probably through my 20s, I would probably say, where I was really struggling with that identity piece in terms of who am I,
Mm-hmm.
and then some of the trauma stuff happened, like the trauma from my past, right, and my relationships, and how I handle things, and the struggles that I have, and to some degree some of the struggles I have today too. And so that's kind of what it's been like
Mm-hmm.
growing up. I've been able to get into the work that I do because of my past and my experiences, and it hasn't been maybe the prettiest picture, so to speak, or some would say, wow, this is pretty horrific. But I had to learn how to get through that judgment and that perceptions that others may have
Mm-hmm.
of me in order to be the best version of myself. Not to be too cliche, but it really took me a long time to really start to put to rest that people are going to have judgments and perceptions about you no matter what. And the more I was afraid of that, the more kind of secluded and isolated and kind of closed off I was
Mm-hmm.
uh, with my life, which only just kind of exasperated people's perceptions, right? Because the more you don't let them see, the more they're going to come up with, right?
Yeah.
And it took me a long time to figure that out through frustrations and some of those things. But I started to look at my kids in terms of, if I'm ashamed, if I'm, embarrassed of the things that I've done that in the grand scheme of things that produce wonderful children, well, then that means I'm kind of ashamed of them. And that's not the case at all.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very proud of my kids. I'm very honored to be a father. I'm honored that I get the chance to be a father to them. Um, my relationships with my kids are all different. Um, my oldest, Carly, that until recently, many people didn't know that I had the oldest daughter, Carly. But in the last couple of years, I've tried to kind of reach out to her, and we're still in the process of trying to figure out how to connect.
Mm-hmm.
But that's something that I'm fortunate to be able to have a chance to do, and she's 16 now, and some of this too is on her. Some of this too is her ability to make that choice of what she wants us to be. And I got to accept that, because I chose to not be there in those beginning times for her, and that's something that I can't take back, but it's something that I can hopefully gain strength from, and try to help others, in their own kind of personal struggles or their own goals in their life. So other than that, I got I got Taylor, who's, lives in Bismarck. She's 15. She's phenomenal. She's, caring. She's sweet. She's hard working. She doesn't have much for taking on and listening to BS. She's pretty focused in. Wonderful sophomore. I have Kennedy, who's also 15, soon to be 16 here next week. She'll be 16. Sophomore, about to get ready to play basketball. Socialite, kind of life of the room, very kind-hearted. Probably the one that gives me the most run for my money, I would say. Then we have Morgan, who is 9, very sweet in basketball, very caring, sticks up for others, just a funny girl. And then we have Eva, who's 4, going to be 5 in December. She's the one that's probably taught me the most in the last probably 6-7 months about myself, in terms of just, her and I are probably together the most out of all the kids, just because of the setup. But she's probably taught me the most in terms of remembering who I am and why it's important to not overlook those small moments. And she's funny, super engaged, super smart, very observant. I love watching her and hearing her put concepts together, and kind of you can almost see the wheels spinning as she's kind of putting things together, and we're having these conversations. And she knows too that there's times where she comes up to me and I'm least expecting it, and she gives me a hug, and I was like, wow, that's kind of what I really needed, but I didn't know, but she knew. And so those are the girls, and we do have a puppy named Stormy. I guess she's not much of a puppy anymore. She's taught me some things too about patience and commitment and dedication. So I'm definitely outnumbered, but I really wouldn't have it any other way. So that's kind of my life. Very much kind of Cliff Notes version, but and that's kind of where I'm at today. So,
well, absolutely. Thank you for sharing all that wonderful information, Lamar. I know it's not easy to talk about our past and stuff like that, but in an attempt to possibly help out others that are listening out there, I think it's important, you talked about your father, your biological father. He was a military guy, correct? Lamar?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So you talked about your father. He was a military guy, right? Your biological father. Now, you feel that later on in life, because he didn't have that influence in your life because you didn't know him, do you feel that is kind of what swayed or made you have an identity crisis in a sense? His lack of presence?
No, because my father, now Dan, and my mother Myrna, like I couldn't have asked for better parents, given our circumstances, right? And I don't think much about my biological father because of just the impact that my parents have had on me, even to this day at 42 years old. And I think about the things how I look at parenting and how I look at, handling myself. And I think about all the ways that, all the conversations that I've had with my parents, right? And the conversations I've had with my dad in a lot of ways, and some of those one-sided conversations, but how they have still created such a presence in my life that I often kind of go back to is I wonder what my mom and dad would think or say about this. And one example that I have with my parents is my dad used to be a pretty he was a hunter. He would go hunting, and he had these guns and stuff, and so I think one day I was talking to him about it, and I kind of asked him, I said, how come you don't hunt anymore? more. And he's like, well, he's like, oh, it's because hunting takes time. It's a priority. And he's like, it was either that, and then not being able to go to and engage in your guys' activities. And so he's like, I chose to give up hunting essentially, in efforts to, to support you all and make sure that we're present at your activities. And so, and how I've always looked at that was, it wasn't anything that was a, well, let's kind of weigh this out. It was just something that's just kind of what they did. And there was never no questions about it, right? And it was never no, oh, look at us. This is what, this is what we're doing, right? It was just, this is just what we do because of, we're parents and we're a family. And so, I kind of emulate that in my own life now with my kids and their activities. There's things in life now that I know coming up, and even this year, where I'm going to have to reprioritize some things in my life, and in order to continue to place it as a value of being at my kids' activities and helping them outside of those activities, right? And not being able to do some of the funner things, right, or the things that I like to do kind of more independently. And that's been an okay. I've been okay with that because it always takes me back to my parents. And so, to your question, no, I don't look at my biological father's lack of a presence, having anything really to do with my identity outside of just being a young buck, just coming into kind of his prime, right, and trying to figure out how to be an adult, right, but also having the remnants of trauma that we didn't have a lot of work. We didn't have a lot of resources and service to back in those days in the 80s to really speak to and help individuals, but also families through trauma, right? It was, let's get them in a good home and let's kind of hope things go well, right? And so I think my parents did a phenomenal job with teaching us the skills and giving us the tools and putting us in positions to be successful. Part of that as young people and even at this age, it's knowing which tools to use. And I've told my dad that, I said, listen, Dad, I said, you and Mom have given us all the skills and tools to be successful. It's just I haven't chosen to use the right tools at times. And so I don't see that. I think my parents have for me specifically, I can't speak for the rest of my siblings, but for me specifically, there's so much in my day and how I function and how I aspire to be that my parents have fingerprints all over, right? They have a presence in all of that to some degree. And my mom, right? My dad's much more of the, let's talk it out, right? I'm going to bring you perspective. My mom kind of much more of here, talk to your dad, right? But it doesn't diminish my mom's role in all this, because I think my mom's role is, to take care kind of my dad, right? And do those things, right? Be that support, so dad can do what your dad does well, right? So my mom does some amazing things. She manages, she organizes, right? She schedules everything. She's on top of stuff, right? Which then allows my dad to utilize his resources and his skills, right? If that makes sense, So to me, they're both equally, valuable. They have their roles. I think they play them very well. And again, it's there's not many days that go where I don't see their imprinting on me somewhere throughout my day. There's not many days that go by. So,
well, that's really awesome to see that they had that amount of influence in your life. I firmly believe in order for you to have influence, you have to have that presence there. You have to spend time with your children. You know what I mean? If you're not there, you're not going to have that influence. That's, we see it even with our children at school, where their peers have more influence over their lives than we do. It's because they're spending more times with them, you know what I mean, than what they are with their own parents, I like what you talked about as your dad, how he prioritized, he gave away something he loved in order to be there and fulfill,
these things that he needed to fulfill with loving his children and raising his children and being that engaged father, and I think that's important. Sometimes as dads, we want to put things in boxes, right? As men, we categorize stuff. When we're in this box, we're in work mode. When we're in this box, we're in veg mode. You know what I mean? It's kind of like looking at a waffle, in the different little compartments. We like to compartmentalize, and
Yeah.
it's good to see how your father was like, all right, I got these needs and I have these wants, but my children need me. I want to
Yeah.
go hunting, but my children need me. And it's good to see that he put you guys first. I think if more fathers were to do that and die to themselves and their selfish needs or wants, I should say, I think,
Mm-hmm.
the family dynamic would be a lot more fluid and a lot more healthier.
Yeah, I think having those conversations, because I mean, it's something for me personally that I struggle with,
Mm-hmm.
and I've moved, and I think I've moved along, and I hope that I moved along,
Mm-hmm.
but I moved along this kind of trajectory of really starting to think more about that,
Mm-hmm.
especially in the height of how things have been, right, both politically, right, and
Mm-hmm.
the culture of diversity and kind of what that's meant, and then then COVID, right, and so
Mm-hmm.
there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty that's happening, right, and our kids are in the midst of this, right, and this could be a positive thing in the grand scheme of things, or it could be very detrimental, right,
Mm-hmm.
but I know that in the work that I do, it translates into fatherhood is that then I need to be more a part of it. I need to be much more in tune to not only how I'm doing with this, but how are my kids doing with this?
Mm-hmm.
Because it is something that it's a little bit different than what I remember growing up with in terms of just some of the outside stressors and pressures that are facing our kids and our youth today.
Mm-hmm.
There's just so many more. There's so many different avenues of potentially stressing situations that are happening, right? We've got so much clickbait stuff, right? And
Mm-hmm.
Things at our kids' fingertips that we didn't really have that. I didn't have that growing up, and not that long ago. And so
Mm-hmm.
it really is something where I feel that it's that prioritizing, and I'm learning how to prioritize and being okay with that, and also trying to figure out a balance too is
Mm-hmm.
important. So especially in this day where I think we're in the midst of pretty significant changes, even though we don't know what that is. I think we can all feel. I hope that we can all feel that
Mm-hmm.
we're kind of in the midst of potential change, like a pretty significant change, and there's this thought of, well, I can't wait for things to go back to normal, right? Well, we're just
Mm-hmm.
going to kind of wait this out. Well, I don't know if that's if going back to what we were was helpful, right, or was getting us to where we needed to go,
Mm-hmm.
versus now there's just kind of this feeling where, hey, we can make some changes, right, and I can be a part of that, and I can help my kids learn how to be a part of that. And so there's a lot going on right now, and I just think that being with the kids and being a support to the community is it's crucial. So
Mm-hmm. No, and I agree with you 100%. I don't personally believe that we're ever going back to the way things were. You know what I mean? And I don't think it
right.
would be even healthy to go back to the way things were. I mean, we were so drawn out. I know for me, I was completely checked out. They say the curse of fatherhood is absence, or presence. And that was
Mhm.
100% true for me. I mean, my presence was never really felt. You know what I mean? They knew I was around as a blue collar
Yep.
father, providing for the family. They knew I was around, but I wasn't around enough to have that influence over their lives.
Right.
And that's where this whole podcast kind of came around about, because, I finally understood that I'm more than a paycheck for my family. I have certain roles that
Yeah.
God has given me to provide for my children. You know what I mean? To provide not just a roof over their head or a paycheck or whatever, but to provide protection, to provide love. And like you said earlier, to raise up healthy children that can handle situations. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? especially change. I
Yeah.
think that's one of the biggest things right now we can show our children is how to handle change. We just recently moved from New Mexico to Southern California. We did it in 3 weeks, and it was crazy. I mean, it was crazy, crazy stressful. But hey,
Yeah.
we showed, me and my wife as a unified front, how to adapt to change, how to face change with courage. Yeah. Was it scary? Absolutely, dude. We're going to a place where we hadn't even seen yet.
Right.
You know what I mean? That takes
Right.
great courage, I mean, prime example, my daughter, she went to a school that's 4 times the size of her normal school. She's freaking out, you know what I mean? But she can look to me and she can look to my wife and be like, okay, my parents are level-headed. This is scary for them too. And now I need to keep my head level, and I'm going to adapt to this change because change is good.
Yeah.
It's inevitable.
And it can be a perception. And again, I think perception for a lot of folks, even in the work that I do, I think perception is a make or break, right? I mean, most people will kind of tend to look at things kind of through one lens, right? And part of the job that I get to do and what I love is to present multiple lenses. Well, that's one way to look at it, but you could also look at it like this, right? And to give people just kind of hope, right? Or just kind of an idea that, hey, this doesn't always have to read the same way. It doesn't always have to have the same outcomes based off of how I just choose to look at it very singularly, right? That there are different outcomes, or I at least have a chance to change an outcome, although knowing that I don't have control over everything, right? But I do have control about how I deal with it, right? How I manage it, right? And what I do within it. And I love that, with the kids, right? It's, in your move, right? Because it's not only what we say to our kids, but it's how we conduct ourselves during those times, right?
Yes.
90% of our communication is our nonverbals, right? So we can say what we want to say to our kids, but if we're not kind of performing and functioning, right, that we're going to kind of handle this, right? Our kids are going to feel that, right? We share energy, right? We give off energy, and people can feel those things. So it's making sure that what we're saying and kind of what we're doing is matching up, right? So yeah, I love, I think that's great. That's a great example that you shared about, a quick move like that, right? From one part to another, and then, the environmental changes that go with that, a school that's 3 times the size, like, holy smokes, like what are we doing? Right. But again, I just think it's working together. Right? Whether you're in an intact home or whether you're in a split home, right? Because a lot of folks, and my kids, we have a split home. So, it's the trickiness of trying to maintain, values, knowing that there are differences, and then how do we communicate those things, and which isn't always gold. It's not the most prettiest thing at times, and it's something that I try to be more mindful of. Is sifting through what are differences in just kind of values and perspective, and what are the differences that are impacting my kids, right, or impacting the kids, and how do we reconcile those things, right? How do we talk about those conversations and still, be in a partnership and be a support of each other as parents, whatever that looks like. So.
No, and I agree. And then even just hats off to you. I learned recently from one of our past guests, Joel Hallbaker. He's a blended families coach. I mean, super awesome episode. We just aired it. And he just talked through all the different frustrations that parents of a blended family have to go through. You know what I mean? It's completely different than an intact family. I mean, it has different problems that it present itself, and the whole dynamic is different and everything. And, just for him to go through the 10 commandments, as he calls them, of being a blended family father, you know what I mean? And just having that courage to step up and be able to do that. I mean, it was pretty awesome to hear him go through all those different tactics that he teaches, you know what I mean? And highly suggest anybody who has a blended family or anything like that they would listen to that podcast. It was super solid. He had great information, and it was solid, man. It was.
Yeah, we'll have to connect on that. You have to maybe email me the name.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to ask you right now, Lamar, what do you see about the state of fatherhood today? I know you deal with a lot of fathers and stuff like that, but what do you see our country as, you know what I mean, and the state of the fatherhood that's happening today?
I think I see a little bit of everything.
Mm-hmm.
Again, and it's not all fathers, right? And it's always kind of based off of, we tend to, as a society, we tend to over sensationalize the negative things, right? We remember the negative things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we look at the negative things. And so, I'm around fathers in my personal life and professionally that, there are people that they're fathers that I aspire to kind of be more like in some ways. And I'm around fathers professionally and personally that, I think are trying to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
And I would include myself in there from time to time.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are definitely those fathers out there who maybe just to put it in a very kind of, very polite way, but are just, haven't had the models, haven't had the experience of knowing what that's been like, right? Or having a father in their own upbringing to model that, right? And they know what they know, right? And then, then you have other fathers who are, struggling with not having the greatest upbringing and the greatest experiences, but also with mental illness or substance use, right? I mean, so there's a lot of different factors, and I think you see it all across the board.
Yeah.
With where fathers are at, and for me, in the work that I do, it's good because I get to talk to fathers, right, and I get to talk to about their relationship, with their family and with their kids, right? And a lot of fathers come in the capacity that I see a lot of fathers is that there's typically something going on between the parents, right? Whether there's marital history or issues going on, whether there's relationship conflict or whether there's a divorce, whether there's a separation, right? And then the courts are involved, right?
Yep.
And the court system, is quite honestly, it can be a little slanted, right?
Oh yeah.
But I do talk to fathers about that. I say, you have to understand there's a rhyme and a reason why it was built this way, because there are legitimately fathers out there who are making this harder for other fathers, right?
Yeah.
And so which side of that fence, which side of that rope are you want to pull? Are you one that's deliberately, kind of putting your own feelings and your own thoughts regarding the system, right? And you're so mad at the system, right, that you're not engaging in services, right? Or you're not engaging in your family's lives and your kids' life because you're mad at your, the partner, right? Or the ex, or you're mad at the system or you're mad at the system. So now I'm just not going to do anything because I'm angry. Right. And this is kind of my way of protesting the system. Well, okay. But how in the grand scheme of things is that solving anything? How is that making things better? Right. How is that modeling for your kids? Right. And so I get to talk to fathers about this stuff, and I get to talk to mothers too, and part of my book, as I was developing it, as we were developing it, even though it's a children's book, it kind of had this other layer of, well, it's kind of a father's book. Well, then as I got to thinking about it, well, it really is not just a book for fathers and kids. It's really a book for everybody, right? Specifically for mothers, right? Because of these traditional values, right, of what fathers are paychecks, right? They're out in the field, right? Or they're out doing these things, right? And they come home and, there's some traditional roles that are still kind of undertoning today's definitions of parenting, right? There's still some undertones of those traditional values. Is, I hope a mom is able to read that book and understand that, hey, no matter what, right? No matter the circumstances of the family or the father, don't just assume that they don't think about or have thoughts about their children, right? Even if they are kind of in this place where they're kind of fighting the system, so to speak, or they're feeling like they've gotten the raw deal at the end of the stick, kind of a deal. Don't think that fathers don't love their kids, right? We have feelings. We have strong feelings about our kids, right? When we have to drop kids off, right? Or when I had to work on the railroad to support my kids, my three oldest, and I had to go work on the railroad for 2.5 years, in my kids' infancy years, and just in order to pay for daycares and diapers, having to go work on the railroad, live in hotels, traveling, working 25, sometimes, about 25, 30 days at a time, right? 14, 15 hours. And having to sacrifice, that time with my kids, those most formidable years, in order just to put food on the table, right? Pay daycare bills, knowing that, I don't get to see them.
Yeah.
Right. That I don't, get to pick them up from daycares, and I don't get to do those things. And then when I do come home to see, my daughters, I haven't seen them for so long. And again, maybe a month or a month and a half, where I come in and they kind of look at me as a stranger.
Exactly.
And how devastating that was for me to go through that. Right. And, again, perception is reality for people. Well, he's, where's he at? Well, he's working. Well, he'd much rather be here, but don't for 1 minute doubt how much I care and love my kids and miss my kids. Right. And I think that's part of this book that I want people to understand or realize, is that, hey, don't dismiss and don't underestimate, what fathers are thinking about, whether they're there in person consistently or whether they're kind of figuring it out, whether there are circumstances that prevent it. Don't just assume that, how the father feels about their kids. One, because we're not really necessarily given the okay to express those things, right? Like we kind of talked about, right?
Yeah.
We're not really necessarily, permitted, right? It's not necessarily the thing to express, but we still have those feelings, we still have those thoughts, and I think more fathers have those than not. And I want to be able to help them be able to express that and be okay to express that, and hopefully through that expression, that helps them kind of get closer to and developing inroads to having a stronger bond and a stronger lasting commitment relationship with their kids. So,
no, and I agree with you 100%. I'm glad that there's another avenue, another tool that you have created through your book to help fathers out there with their emotions. As fathers, especially you're around my age, so we grew up in a different time frame. We grew up where tough guys don't cry. You know what I mean? And you don't show your emotions. You get the wind knocked out of you. Guess what? You get up, you dust yourself off, you get back in the game, don't cry, don't show those emotions, and that's how we're brought up in that time frame. And I think we go on to teach our children that as well, because why? We don't know any better. We were taught that, so let's continue with that. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Right. Well, it is broke and we need to fix it. You know what I mean? I'm not saying raise up, boys that are, not masculine or anything like that by any means. But I am saying, hey, tough guys do have feelings. And if we're not talking and communicating what's going on inside us, as men, we have a tendency to bottle that up. And what does it do? It turns into anger. And then what does that anger do? It comes out, and it usually comes out on those we love, which is our wife, which is our children. Then all of a sudden we're flashing on them. I did it.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of blue collar dads, if not even, let's not even generalize it, not just blue collar dads, but every dad out there, when he gets stressed out, when he gets bottled up, if he doesn't know how to deal with these emotions, he's going to act out some way or another. And our children do the same thing. You know, when our children are feeling stressed, and I'm sure you've seen it, when they're stressed, when they don't know how to communicate their emotions because we didn't show them the correct way to deal with emotions, what do? They're going to act out, and they're going to get your attention, whether it be good or bad. I much rather than be getting my attention by getting straight A's in school than getting a call at 2:00 in the morning saying, hey, your son or daughter have been in a drinking accident.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. And again, it's how do we promote, this kind of this well-being, right? This balance, right? And even for fathers, because it's not how we used to look at traditional roles, right? The father does this and the mother does that, right? Or partners and all that. That's again, like change. It's no longer clear cut like that. We're in the midst of kind of changing in terms of how we define roles within family and who's doing what, right? I mean, our divorce rates are really high, you know, and so we know that there's a lot more, split households, right? So we know there's co-parenting that has to happen, and there's not always communication, right? And so we need both parents, fathers specifically for this conversation, to be able to step into that role of, this is what I'm feeling. This is what I'm thinking, right? Let's have a conversation. Let's slow down. How are you doing? How can I help you with it? Right? And again, I think they seem very easy, but they're hard to do. It's hard to do because one, life is pretty fast right now, right? I think things are coming pretty. I mean, the weeks kind of just fly by, and so we get wrapped up into our day to day, and we often don't miss those. We often miss those moments because we are so kind of just inundated with things happening with snaps of fingers, and again, days turns into weeks. So part of it is a practice that we need to instill and be intentional about, is making sure that we find moments, to slow life down, check ourselves out, check in with our kids, hey, what's going on? No, a lot of times you'd be like, no, it's good. Well, this is the time. What's up? You know what I mean? And at least start to build this new culture, or this new value of, we take time to value and honor, kind of what's going on in our lives. And as parents, we need to model that.
Yes. And that's where intentionality comes in. That's one of our pillars that we talk about at the Show Up Dad, is being intentional. And you hit the nail right on the head, brother. I mean, be intentional. Check in with your kids. See how they're doing. I believe now more than ever that the media and certain agendas out there are hell bent on seeing the fall of the family. Charlie Kirk, he's a well-known public figure. I want to quote him real quick. He said, destroy the family, destroy the nation. And that this is the agenda that he's seeing throughout the world. And I firmly agree with it. You know what I mean? I mean, when a father has to go and work X amount of hours where he's actually been pulled out of the home to support his family, that's taken away from his time that he has at the home to have that positive influence, to be that moral character that we're called to be. You know what I mean? Because now both parents now can't even afford just a regular lifestyle, with inflation and everything else. I mean, gosh, gas is $4 something in California right now. That's ridiculous, and yet we're closing more pipelines.
Well, and the destroy the family and destroy the nation. I mean, I think, clearly, I think through history, right? I think those principles, tenets, have been in place, and they've been able to make headway, right? Because I think you look at the fabric of communities, right, and kind of the breakdown of what it means to be neighborly, right, and are we doing those neighborhood type things that we used to do, kind of growing up, like the Wonder Years kind of stuff, right? Are we getting together as neighbors and as communities? Are we doing those things, or are we kind of more blocked off, right? Or are we more just kind of separate and segregated within that? And obviously with COVID here, right? I think COVID's been a pretty big indicator of kind of where we're at. as a result of, because of the masks, right? Because of the social distancing, right? I mean, it's counterintuitive to who we are, I think, as people, right? I mean, we're very communal people, right? And you set up social distancing, and you have, you know, signs all over the place to enforce social distancing and masks, and you know, you get people all over the board in terms of how they feel about it. It just kind of promotes this kind of separateness. I'm going to group up with who's like me. And again, it gets away from this kind of community, this family aspect, right? In a much more macro sense of family, right?
Yeah.
As a nation, we're a big family, right? And as state-wise, we're families. You know, it gets down in your counties, or, you know, to your cities, right? Where it's all kind of a family, right? Everybody kind of has their roles within it. And I think that's been breaking down, you know, and I think that's been a, you know, a sign. I think that's been something that's been going on since, you know, the founding, with our policies and interactions with Native American Indigenous people, right? Which I represent as well. So there are definitely principles that I think that have been in place that have really kind of promoted separateness, right? Conquer, divide, or divide and conquer, and conquer, right? And I think this is the time where we can decide to push back on that collectively and say, no, even though there are things that are out of control, and we got to be responsible to maintain, you know, the spread and overall health, we still got to now find ways to maintain connections with each other. Because I need you, my neighbor, I need you, and you need me, and we need each other in order to kind of maintain and build, right? And so we can develop a much more stronger, healthier, balanced generation for our kids and their kids. And so that's what I feel like my responsibility is to my kids as well, is to, how do I help you become stronger, so then you can learn in some ways from our mistakes, but be balanced and leave this place in a better trajectory when you leave. Right. And so, yeah, that was a lot. So
no, but I mean, it's something that needs to be talked about. I mean, they're saying now that 70%, the national average is 70% are without a stable father in the home.
Yeah.
I mean, that's crazy, dude. Those statistics are absolutely crazy. You know what I mean? And I think fathers need to be back in the home. You know what I mean? That's a good goal where we need to start off in the United States. You know what I mean? Is getting our fathers back in the home. I'm not saying necessarily home, like staying home and not, you know, being there, you know what I mean? But in a sense that, hey, you know, why are they having to work 4 or 5 jobs sometimes? You know what I mean? This is outrageous. This is insane.
Yeah. And I think in our systems of policies, right, you know, need to be talked about more too. I think there are some policies and some rules in place that I think are counterproductive to this idea of how do we kind of embrace and bring back in fathers, rather than these rules and policies that don't apply to a larger percent of fathers, but they apply enough to where, you know, it as a father, I can, as far as being on that side of the fence, which I have been, you know, where I've had to face and have to deal with some of these rules and policies and laws, you know, it's like, this doesn't make sense. You know, how is this setting me up, you know, for a reunion, right, or healthier relationship with my kids, when, like you said, I have to, you know, maintain 4 or 5 jobs, and even after I even do that, then, you know, I have barely enough, you know, scratch to do anything with, and to barely survive on, right? And then I don't have really much say into what goes on with my kids' medical care, educational care, right?
Oh yeah.
And again, there is a percentage of fathers who are in that mold, right? Who are in that, you know, the fathers who are just kind of deliberately making decisions, right? But that's a smaller percentage of fathers. That's not the 70%, right? That's not the 70%. There's a huge percentage of fathers who are actively trying to make it work. There are a percentage of fathers who, you know, for whatever reason, are doing it and doing it well, to quote LL Cool J, they're doing it well, right? And so
Mhm.
outside of that, it's I think we also need to start having conversations about how we're looking at family court systems, and
Yeah.
are we really trying to promote family reunification, so to speak, and parental involvement or is it about who's going to pay for child support, right?
Mhm.
And just as long as it's not us as a state, right?
Right.
Um, that kind of creates quite a bit of a different meaning in
Mhm.
terms of that conversation, father, right? So,
I had Mark Real. He was a past guest. He's a Real Fathers Rights Movement. He came on here and he talked about how, the court system and how it's one-sided and all this stuff. And he's actually doing some great things instead of just complaining about it. He's actually
yeah,
going to legislation and stuff like that, and being this father advocate, to try to help fathers out, because it is one-sided. The system's broken and it needs to be fixed. But one of
yeah,
the things I got out of that whole podcast is that as parents, we need to understand that what is our main purpose? You know what I mean? If you're jaded and you're pissed off about your spouse and you want to take it out on them by withholding your children, or per se, even trying to get more child support, and just basically trying to run your spouse into the ground, you know what I
yeah,
mean? Grow up. You have lost sight of your purpose. And your purpose is those kids, to raise healthy children. And when you're fighting like that, you're not giving them a good example. You're not. You're only hurting them. And I think that's what people need to keep in mind is, man, there's a bigger purpose here. You know, um, as a tradesman, I'm a journeyman lineman, and I also train kids at Cal, Nevada, which is one of the greatest apprenticeships in the country for linemen. And one of the things we always see with these apprentices is that they get tunnel vision. And I liken
mhm,
that to these parents, don't lose sight of what's going on. Don't get that tunnel vision.
yeah,
You have a bigger purpose. And that purpose is raising healthy children, raising the next generation.
yeah.
Because, you know, go ahead.
And that and therein lies the layers of this, right? Because it
Mm-hmm.
is it is that one of those things that we're able to kind of see the summit, right? And say, this is kind of what we want. That's their goal, right?
Mm-hmm.
Healthy, co-parenting, trusting parents, right? Regardless of their situation and the dynamics, right?
Mm-hmm.
However, we do have a large, because we have our 70% of fathers who are not in the picture, so to speak, right? And our
Mm-hmm.
divorce rates are high. We do also have the reality of many of these families. This is what their family life looked like, and
Mm-hmm.
so there's a narrative generationally that has played out, right? And so we may have families that come in, and we can point these things out. But again, it kind of goes back to, what you know. Like, I don't know anything else, right? This is kind of what's familiar to me. And so it becomes our job, right? It becomes my job. It becomes, your job in terms of working with these young apprentices and whatnot to be able to speak to others in a way that, hey, this is what we know, right? I understand validating that, hey, this was your lived experience, but is this what you want for your kids, right? And if this is a kind of a reenactment of what you've experienced, is this what you want? And now how do we begin to change that narrative for your family now and for your kids in the future? So they're not going through these same generational, unhealthy kind of dynamics in their own families or in their own life. Right. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's this piece that we also have to hold in terms of understanding and validating what people have gone through, and helping them to identify what is it that you do want, right?
Mm-hmm.
Knowing that, hey, if you've never experienced anything else, this is going to be really foreign to you, right? And it might be a little off-putting to you. But if you want something different, these are the things that we might need to look at in order to make those changes. And what we do now, hopefully, ideally, is going to either completely change that narrative down the road. It may not happen today, it may not happen tomorrow, but if we commit to it and we work on it,
Mm-hmm.
over time, right, it'll start to change the narrative. And so hopefully generationally, it'll kind of phase itself out,
Mm-hmm.
right? We're not going to be having the same dynamics, these same unhealthy dynamics that are happening because this is what you grew up with. This is what you know.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to try to change. We're going to change the narrative to that.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and I agree with you 100%. I don't think that we just got here where we're at today. I mean, this was a slow, steady burn. It was an unraveling throughout the years to where we're at today. And in order to change it, it's not going to be changed in our lifetime, but it starts with that pebble, dropping that pebble into a pond and then seeing those ripple effects. And hopefully, just hopefully, if we start making the changes today and raising the next generation healthy, future generations, like our slogan, are going to benefit from it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And it starts with us. For sure.
Absolutely, brother. I want to ask you to go ahead and share with our audience, Lamar, how they can get a hold of your book and how they can find you, if you don't mind, brother.
Yeah, absolutely. The book, Are You My Daddy, is available on Amazon only. And so just go on there and order a box full or 2 boxes full. That's where it's at. So.
Right on. And social media, do you have a pretty big influence there?
Oh man, so I'm in this push-pull with social media, where I'm on Facebook, my personal Facebook page, more than I'm on Instagram or anything like that. Amanda has been trying to get me to be more involved in the social media piece, but it does kind of stress me out a little bit, thinking about speaking and getting in front of and talking about things. So I don't have as big of a following as I probably could or should. And I still don't know where I'm at with that. So maybe some feedback from, how I talked about today or how I did today would be helpful too, to maybe influence that or the other. So.
Well, right on, Lamar. Thank you once again for coming on here and sharing everything about this. I want to check out your book, brother. Thank you for just getting on here and being real with us. You know what I mean? Sharing your story and stuff, So once again, thank you. This is the Show Up Dad, and, just encouraging fathers to be more than that paycheck. Thank you.